So once again, thank you all for joining. Let me introduce the speakers who are also the authors of this volume, Precarious Asia. Professor Arne Kalleberg is at UNC Chapel Hill, where he's a professor and the chair in the Department of Sociology. Professor Kwang-Yeong Shin is joining us from Chung-Ang University in Seoul. And Professor Kevin Hewison is now Emeritus from UNC Chapel Hill and still retains an appointment at the University of Hong Kong. Additionally, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Jenny Weiling Chan, who's joining us from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. With that, please, can I hand it over to our authors to talk to us a little bit about their book?
Thanks everyone for joining us. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about how this project on Precarious Asia, which resulted in the book Precarious Asia, actually came about. Like many academic research projects, it's been a long-term project. The beginnings of it really go back to about 2007, when Professor Kalleberg and I made a proposal to the Social Science Research Council to lead a workshop on nation states, global business, and what at that time we called flexible labour. That proposal was approved, and we put together a panel of about a dozen scholars for the SSRC's conference in Dubai, which in 2008, which they called Inter-Asian Connections Conference. Several of the papers that were presented at that workshop were later published, but not as a coherent project. However, for Professor Kalleberg and myself, that workshop and the paper that we produced and the report that we produced and revised became a stimulus for some more work and some more thinking, and provided a basis for what then became an application for quite limited seed funding from UNC, and which was aimed at making an application to the Andrew Mellon Foundation for their Sawyer seminar series, which was to be based within the Carolina Asia Center. That application, which was successful, was for the study of precarious work in Asia in the period from about 2010 to 2012. That project did a lot of work, actually. It appointed a postdoctoral fellow, a doctoral fellow, and importantly, created a seminar which ran over 3 semesters, where the people who were signed up for the seminar read and discussed a range of seminal publications or works that we thought were important within this field. And we discussed these books and works with the authors by inviting them to come to Chapel Hill. So some of those included Ching-Kwon Lee, Beverly Silver, Heidi Gottfried, Anne Allison, Guy Standing, John Harris, Michael Schau, and Eva Hansen. We also sought collaborators on this project because it went beyond seminars and appointing postdoctoral fellows. It allowed us to organise seminars and working groups. And one of the first people we thought of for this project, which was to take it wider, was Kwang-Yeong Shin, and also Michael Schau at Academia Sinica. Both were enthused by the idea of a comparative study of precarious work in Asian countries. The first meeting of that group was sponsored by and held at Chung-Ang University in Seoul in 2011 with Kwang-Yeong's leadership and help and support. The second workshop was held at UNC Chapel Hill in February 2012, and participants included country partners from 9 Asian countries: China, India, Indonesia, Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, Sri Lanka, Taiwan, and Thailand, as well as and included also core working group members located in Chapel Hill. The workshop that was held was sponsored, of course, by the Andrew Mellon Foundation and also the Carolina Asia Center. The papers that were presented at that workshop were revised, reviewed, and accepted for 2 special issues in the American Behavioral Scientist. Kevin, if you might put up the screenshot you've got of those issues. And those two issues were published in 2013. One of those special issues focusing on East Asia, China, Japan, and Taiwan, and the other on South and Southeast Asia, being Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and India. Michael Shao at Academia Sinica was part of that ABS project, and he actually proposed a further workshop to be held in Taipei, supported by the Institute of Sociology at Academia Sinica. And he wanted to take the papers further from the ABS special issues and look at the policy responses to precarious work in Asia, and specifically Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka. And the book also included theoretical chapters and a paper on the whole of Southeast Asia. The outcome of that workshop became the edited book, which you can see on your screen there, I think, called Policy Responses to Precarious Work in Asia, which came out in 2015, co-edited by Shao, Kalleberg, and Hewison. Discussions between Kwang-Yeong, Arne, and myself emerging from that Taipei meeting came to the view that even more in-depth and comparative studies were needed on this topic, with more attention to development paths, to gender, and to other factors, and especially to try and, which was Kwang-Yeong's idea, to try and drill down into the data which was available and try to develop a project out of that, which saw the focus of our work shift to Seoul and Chung-Ang University, and eventually including Seoul National University. And at that point, I think what I'll do is I'll hand over to Kwang-Yeong, who can take the project up to the present day.
Thank you very much. Before I talk, first of all, I'd like to thank Carolina Asia Center and UNC for organizing this book talk. As Kevin talked about a long history of our collaboration regarding the research on precarious work in Asia, it took time to incubate more integrated research work on precarious work in Asia beyond collections of papers written by scholars from each country in Asia. So we discussed the issue of some collaborative project on writing a book project. So we submitted a research grant for Asian studies to the Asia's Institute at Seoul National University in September 2016. Then we were successful, and we could start our long book project in January 2017. It was a really long project. It took almost 5 years to complete. We focus on 3 countries: Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. As you know, Asia is a very heterogeneous area in terms of cultural religion, history, economy, and political system. We focus on democratic capitalist economies in Asia. So we chose 3 out of 9 countries we started. And we pay attention to countries at different level of economic development. The politics and economy in each country might interact differently with global politics and economy. Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia represent democratic economies in Asia. And also, they are significantly different in institution and policies, dealing with labor issues, such as unemployment, job security, social protection, and labor politics. So we focus on some similarity and difference among democratic capitalist economies in Asia. Three countries show in common also the high ratio of precarious work and wage inequality among workers in the labor market. Of course, three authors have been familiar with those countries concerning labor, politics, and social policy, also some kind of political development. We had a book project report in 2017. So we presented the book content, outlines, significant findings, and a major argument based on what we have done. So we try to synthesize the political economy, comparative historical sociology, sociology of war and welfare, and Asian studies. So it is a kind of a synthetic product combining all kind of subfield in social sciences. We submit the final report to the Asia Institute at Seoul University in February 2019. And we began to revise the manuscript, add more materials for the book publication. We exchanged our ideas and comments on the manuscript. From the beginning of 2020, we could work extensively on the manuscript for the book project. So it is an interesting project because we did all kind of revision and addition during the whole period of COVID-19 pandemic. We got benefit from the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we could utilize a remote conference program to communicate because we could not get together. First of all, I try to explain a little bit the history of the revision and addition. First of all, we used a three-way Skype conversation for the manuscript revision since the outbreak of the COVID-19 in January 2020. That's the instrument for some remote conference program. Otherwise, we discussed the possibility of meeting to make a book project in the spring or summer of 2020, but it was not possible. Then we used Zoom to revise and add the draft in April 2020. So after 2 months, we changed the remote conference program. We have had the Zoom meeting more than 70 times since then. So every week we got a Zoom meeting. Without Zoom, it took much longer time than we expected. So it is so long collaboration through Zoom program, and finally we could finish the manuscript for the Stanford University Press. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Kwang-Yeong and Kevin. So I got to tell you before I start telling you very briefly what our theoretical perspective is. What an absolute pleasure has been working with these two guys, Kwang-Yeong and Kevin, over the last couple of years. As Kwang-Yeong said, we did this on Zoom, which was something that I look forward to every week. You know, the conversation with these guys, finding out things were going in Asia, and it was a lot of fun. And I think we benefited a lot from the COVID pandemic. Not that I wished it upon anybody. So let me just thank a couple of people for their help with this. I would like to thank the Panel Data Research Center at Keio in Japan, the Korea Labor Institute, and the Budan Pusat Statistic in Indonesia. I probably pronounced that wrong. Thank you very much for your support and for your help in producing the data that we used in this book. As Kwang-Yeong mentioned, we have a lot of disciplines converging on this book. Kwang-Yeong and I are sociologists. We both got our degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in different eras. Kevin is a political economist, I would say. He's in the Department of Politics, as well as Asian Studies. So these guys really gave me an education in Korea and in Indonesia, especially, as well as Japan. So thank you very much. It's been a really useful experience for me personally. Let me tell you a little bit about, despite our differences, despite the disciplinary differences, what unites us is our focus on institutions as the major force in society that produces outcomes that we care about, like inequality. We believe in the importance of the power relationship as explaining many of these things. And so our arguments center around the role of capital and labor in terms of their relative power in these three different countries. And so we argue that precarious work results from the imbalance between power, capital over labor in these three countries, which is produced by changes in the global economy as well as the domestic economies. So if Kevin, if you'd be so good enough to put on the conceptual framework, I'll just briefly talk a little bit about, this is sort of this conceptual model underlies our argument in the book. Now, this is not a model that we estimate with data. We estimate pieces of it though, but it's more of a conceptual framework. And as we see here on the left, we have a multi-scalar or multi-level kind of argument. We go from the macro to the meso to the micro levels of analysis. And we're combining an institutional historical approach, which talks about how institutions and other structures like politics, labor market institutions, social protection policies, how those things have behavioral effects within each country. We're trying to integrate that historical institutional approach with a political economy approach, which focuses on differences in the power relations between capital and labor mediated by the government in these kind of countries. And that perspective is more useful for explaining changes in these things, because this is a very dynamic system. So very briefly, things that happen at the macro level, at the country level, and at the transnational level affect what we call precarious work, which we conceptualize in a very multidimensional way. It refers to whether or not work is non-standard or not, and we can explain what that means, but temporary work, independent contractors and so on, self-employed. Informal economy is another dimension, and that's especially important in a country like Indonesia. And a lack of social protections. What characterizes all of these countries and which makes work especially precarious is the lack of a well-defined social safety net that is outside the labor market that helps people cope with the stresses and strains of life. And our argument is that, and the big arrows, the fat arrows, refer to the main themes of the book that we unpack in the various chapters. The macro factors, together with precarious work, produces inequality and poverty, which we document. And we should say, very importantly, that all of these changes, all of these effects are heavily gendered in these countries, that these don't affect everybody equally. And men in all of these countries are advantaged with regard to all of these aspects of work. But then as precarious work develops and has its consequences, it leads to reactions on the part of workers, their unions, civil society, and the government itself, top down from the government, bottom up from workers themselves, which sets in motion a feedback loop, which then will change the nature of capitalism here. So that gives you an overview of where we are. It's an interdisciplinary, multi-level kind of conceptual framework. And with that said, I'm pleased to turn this over to Jenny, who did us the big service of taking a look at the book and reading it, and will report to you on what she found. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing me in. Well, I'm so delighted to be here to learn from the three distinguished professors. Thank you so much for doing this great book. Well, during the pandemic, I'm also very grateful that the logistic or distribution and delivery workers who get this book to me in my home door to door, but they are exposed to the health risk, even though they are hailed as the heroes or essential workers. Well, so I really believe that this is an important occasion for us to join together to share insights, because the book will have long-term impact as well as relevance, even in the post-pandemic era. So I've been preparing some key messages, and then after the main points, we will open up for discussion, and I would love to learn more from all of you. So I'm really glad that the authors, the three professors, they have long-term collaboration, their chemistry and the excitements, the intellectual exchanges they have. This is really admirable. They set up a good model for me. Well, I focus on China studies as well as labor politics. And this is an eye-opening book that brings me to Japan, South Korea, as well as Indonesia. It's quite a special selection of these three countries as the cases for comparison. And I am so glad that I've been learning about the trend of the rise of precarious work and precarization that have been deepened over these 2 years, and it has been a long structural process that have been shaping the lives of workers and their families. I myself is also from a working class family. My parents were born in the villages in southern part of China, and then they moved to Hong Kong in the middle of 1970s. So I was born in Hong Kong. My siblings are also born in Hong Kong. And the book describes some stories that open up a very deep portrait of their struggles that is seemingly speaking to my own self, my own background as well. But this book actually brings us more to some deep discussion. So I'm going to discuss 4 aspects or 4 key points. They are the analytical framework, the concept of precarious work, the link between production and social reproduction, as well as the prospects of social change. The comparative analytical framework is very useful to scholars and activists who wish to further investigate and monitor the long-term developments of Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia from the perspectives of employment rights. The dynamism of Asian capitalism and labor politics receive an insightful analysis in the book, which is mediated by national states and other political actors across different levels, such as political parties, trade unions, and other civil society organizations. The authors found that the extent and consequences of precarious work reflect the relative strengths or weaknesses of transnational and domestic capital and labor in particular sectors of the economy. So they have a wide range of economic sectors, not only manufacturing, but mainly service work and another more casual form of employment. So the interplay of global and domestic forces has eroded social protections and intensified precarious lives during the recent decades. Across cross-national comparisons are complicated by different definitions of regular versus non-regular or formal versus informal employment. Despite all these differences in terms of cross-national comparison, I'm so admired that the authors are able to present the statistical data, the broad picture and the pattern to explain the multiple sources and that make a very strong conclusion that the trend of the rise of precarious work in the three countries. So this systematic comparison is very comprehensive and it motivates us to learn and to update and expand the research agenda that would take us back to the post-Second World War decades to possibly 2050 or far beyond. So this book really do a great work in building a strong and solid foundation for further studies. So this is the first point about the comparative, analytical, historical, and institutional framework that I would like to talk to. And then I will quickly move to the second point, and that is about the core concept of precarious work, which is very clearly defined. I'm not sure whether in our discussions, we will bring more discussion and exchange in terms of the differences between informality and precarity. There have been some scholars who have been trying to distinguish their differences, while at the same time, they seem to have lots of overlap. The authors refer precarious work to the nature of uncertain, unstable, and insecure work in which employees, rather than the government or companies, bear the risk of work. The ideal type of standard employment relationships can be used for illustrative purpose, particularly in the cases of Japan and South Korea amid their industrial takeoff, when lifetime tenure for male employees in large companies was institutionalized. But it doesn't last long. Since the 1990s, the standard employment model characterized by steady jobs and full employment, union protection, these becomes crumble or dismantle, particularly first in Japan and then later on in South Korea. In Indonesia, as the authors had already presented very clearly, from the past to present, non-standard employment has been the norm, whereas formal employment has only ever been available to a small group of employees. In a close look, the authors explain the social composition of precarious labor. From the gender dimension, women are more likely to be in non-standard jobs across the three countries. Female workers and increasingly men of younger and older groups, they face formidable challenges to move socially upward from non-standard to standard employment. So precarious work is becoming more pervasive. Informalization of labor is taking place within the formal sector, thus blurring the boundaries or dualities between formal and informal employment. So now would take us to the third point, and that is about the important link between production and social reproduction. Taking into account the changing historical and political economic context and presenting both quantitative and qualitative data, the authors convincingly explain the driving forces behind the rise of flexible employment and the negative impact on workers' income, job security, and the social reproduction of labor power. Overwork, even worse, death by overwork is tragic. So workers are compelled to work long and irregular hours for low pay or accept only temporary short-term or part-time job opportunities without union representation or collective bargaining. They suffer high stress. In this informal and precarious economy, marriage and childbirth are postponed. So very interesting, the book sheds light on the rise of platform capitalism as well over the last about 10 years or so outside the state-defined labor relations framework. Technological innovators like Amazon, Uber, Deliveroo, Foodpanda, and many others, they have recruited workers through digital platforms to establish a marketplace. But at the same time, maybe after we just click one time on our computer, one click, and then the book comes to me, but we forget the process behind it. And that is human labor, not only drones or robots and other AI, big data. That is behind the scene that we have on the ground logistic and on-demand labor services. So online labor platforms of ride-hailing, food delivery, or parcel express delivery, they have created numerous jobs across rural and urban spaces. But except for very few, an overwhelming majority of the app-based labor force is classified as quote-unquote independent contractors. So they are kind of self-employed or they are not legally recognized as employees. So we can imagine their institutional or legal protection that is really at the minimum. For these low-income working class parents, especially those who have no access to affordable housing, health insurance, pensions, or other social assistance, they struggle with child rearing and care for the elderly. So this is the fourth and the final point. If I just stop here, it seems to be a very pessimistic picture, hopelessness or very desperate. It's true. But concerning the prospects of labor movements and social change, the book also opened up lots of possibilities for change, and it would not be too late. So the authors emphasize that class-based redistribution of income and wealth, which is much needed to reduce the inequality between non-regular and regular workers. They inform and inspire a new direction of social policy debate. So this book is a significant intervention in policy making and reformulation. So far, we know that states and businesses, they share interest to promote liberalization and informalization of labor markets. Employers have consciously used the distinction between formal and informal to avoid the expenses of protected employment. So it's really critical for workers and their supporters, well, including you and myself as researchers, activists, faculty, and students, and all of our participants. We can join hands to mobilize the state and democratize it to better protect workers' dignity, rights, and interests. And there are also lots of space in the civil society for us to change from the bottom up. Maybe I will not have too much hope in Hong Kong right now under the national security law, but darkness will not be forever. And therefore, it will be an important platform for us to exchange our perspectives and to synergize, as you have mentioned, and to build up the pathway to make more decent and fair work for all the workers around the world. So workers themselves, they have already stood up to call for higher wages and better benefits, limitation of overtime work, conversion of non-regular into regular employment, among all other reasonable demands, right? So the book features high levels of contention, and I'm excited to learn about the tactics, organizing efforts, and successes. Well, even though sometimes it is just partial victories because of the crackdown of the state, the return to authoritarian regime in Indonesia and so on. But still, there are indeed many struggles and campaigns that have been going on, and that is not just within local or national level, but sometimes it is transnational or cross-border linkages. So I expect that union organizers and labor rights advocates across the 3 countries will exchange strategies to build workers' power. In a slowing economy since 2008, the global financial crisis, and the enduring global pandemic and its variants over these more than 2 years now, the fight for redistributing resources and creating greater social protections for all workers must carry on. And this will not be confined to the 3 carefully selected case studies right here, Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. It could have a broader implications and relevance when we look into other Asian countries or broadly in the Western societies. To conclude, Precarious Asia is a truly admirable accomplishment. So congratulations once again. You are a good role model, and I thoroughly enjoy reading the book and having a chance to write a review for that. This is really my great honor. I have a lot to learn from you. And as I've been teaching sociology and China studies in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, I will highly recommend this book to my class, to my students and colleagues. So thank you very much for all of you who put years of hard work to finish the book and under quite an exceptional, not normal period of time. So thank you so much for bringing us such a good book and the time that we can come together. Thank you so much.